What is the purpose of a rule? Is it to create order or to enforce control? And what happens when a rule created in the name of unity and success becomes a weapon of oppression, forcing students to choose between their culture and their future? Today's case file from the moral maze is not just a story, it is an investigation into a systemic injustice that festered within the walls of an American high school. We will hear the harrowing testimony of a young student whose school implemented a strict English-only policy, a rule that turned hallways into zones of constant surveillance and native languages into forbidden codes. She walked this tightrope of silence for years, perfecting a system of secret communication to care for her ailing grandmother. But a single life-or-death emergency forced her to break that silence. What followed was not compassion, but a cold, bureaucratic battle against a system that sought to punish her for an act of undeniable heroism. The evidence is before you. The motives will be revealed. Now, it is up to you to be the judge. Our narrator begins her testimony. Our principal, Mr. Harris, spent every single morning announcement reminding us, in his perfectly modulated English, that speaking any other language on school grounds would result in immediate and severe punishment. One word of Spanish, one phrase of Vietnamese, one whisper of French. It all meant the same thing: 3 days of suspension and a permanent ugly mark on your academic record. He loved telling assemblies that English was the language of success, a phrase that dripped with the implication that our languages, the ones we spoke at our dinner tables with our families, were the languages of failure. Spanish was the language of my home. It was the rhythm of my childhood, the language of my grandmother's stories of the old country, the language of my mother's lullabies. Going the entire school day without using a single word of it was a unique form of exhaustion, a constant, low-level stress of self-censorship. It was like holding your breath for 8 hours straight, every single day. The effect on the student body was chilling. I saw kids hang up on their parents mid-call, rather than risk being overheard answering in their native language and getting suspended. We all walked around like half ourselves, our real vibrant voices trapped in our throats, replaced by a careful, hesitant English. For me, the stakes were higher. I kept my phone hidden and silenced at all times for a more serious reason. My grandmother, my abuela, lived with us. She spoke only Spanish, and her heart problems were getting worse. My mum worked a grueling job at a warehouse 40 minutes away and couldn't always answer her phone, making me, a high school junior, the primary emergency contact. For 2 years, I had perfected the art of swallowing Spanish words before they could escape my lips. I even developed a secret, desperate system of communication with Abuela for when she called. We had a code of taps. 3 taps meant take your medicine. 4 meant call mom instead. It was a fragile, absurd system, but it kept me safe. It kept my record clean. I thought I could manage this impossible balancing act until graduation. I was wrong. During 3rd period history class, my phone began to vibrate in my pocket. It wasn't the single buzz of a text message. It was a frantic, insistent series of vibrations. Once, twice, then 12 times, then 25. It was our neighbor, Maria, the emergency-only number for my grandmother. My blood ran cold. My hands were shaking as I palmed the phone under my desk, seeing the missed calls climb. Maria had never called more than twice before. The second our teacher turned to write on the board, I slipped out into the empty hallway, my heart pounding against my ribs. I called back. Maria was screaming into the phone, her voice a torrent of frantic, terrified Spanish. My grandmother had collapsed. She was barely breathing. The paramedics were there, but they couldn't understand Maria. She couldn't translate the long, complex name of Abuela's primary heart medication, and in her panic, she was mixing it up with the name of the one she was fatally allergic to, penicillin. There was no creative workaround this time. There was no tapping code for a heart attack. My grandmother was dying, and I had to choose between her life and my future at this school. I didn't even hesitate. I ran down the empty hallway toward the exit, shouting rapid Spanish into the phone, explaining exactly where the medication was kept, in the bathroom cabinet, third shelf, behind the vitamins, the white bottle, not the blue one. My neighbor put me on speaker so I could talk directly to the paramedics, but they didn't speak Spanish either, so I found myself translating frantically, back and forth, from English to Spanish and back again while sprinting towards my car. The medical terms came out in a jumbled mess, in whatever language I could think of them in first. I was just desperate to get the information across about her cardiac medication and her deadly penicillin allergy. Then back to Spanish to try and calm my neighbor who kept sobbing, asking if my grandmother was going to die. I was so focused, so completely consumed by the mission of getting every detail right that I didn't notice him. Principal Harris, standing by the main entrance, his personal phone held up, recording everything. His face was a mask of cold, unreadable satisfaction. He had finally caught me speaking the forbidden language that was, in that exact moment, saving my grandmother's life. A life or death emergency. A student breaking a rule to save her grandmother. A principal recording the violation for disciplinary action instead of offering to help. Before we learn of the cold, bureaucratic punishment that followed this act of love and the fight for justice it ignited, it is time for your judgment call. In this moment, has the student done anything wrong, or has the school's policy itself become the real, undeniable crime? Cast your verdict. The case against Silence begins. She survived. The doctor at the hospital later sent a letter confirming that the information I translated about her deadly penicillin allergy had, without a doubt, saved her life. But the next morning, my own survival at that school was in question. I walked into first period English to find Principal Harris sitting at my teacher's desk, his laptop open. The entire class was dead silent, the air thick with tension. He turned the laptop toward me, showing the security footage from the hallway. There I was, running, my voice a clear, audible stream of rapid Spanish. "Would you like to explain?" he said, his voice devoid of any emotion as he pulled out a pre-printed suspension form with my name already filled in. "Why you thought you were exempt from our English-only policy?" I tried to explain about my grandmother, the medication, the paramedics, the doctor's confirmation. He held up his hand to stop me, a gesture of ultimate dismissal. "Emergencies," he said, his voice perfectly calm and bureaucratic, "do not override school policy. You could have found another way." The suspension form sat there, on the desk between us, a guilty verdict that had already been decided before I even walked into the room. He told me my disciplinary hearing was scheduled for Thursday, that I had the right to bring a parent, but that all proceedings would be conducted in English only. Over the next few days, I became a ghost in my own school. Whispers followed me everywhere. I felt defeated, but something else happened. My friend Orlando, a quiet guy with glasses who usually kept to himself, helped me document everything, creating a timeline. My chemistry teacher, the one who was too afraid to speak up publicly, quietly pointed me to a page in the student handbook showing the district's own non-discrimination language, a policy that seemed to directly contradict the school's rule. I started talking to other students. I collected anonymous, handwritten statements from a Vietnamese girl who lost her academic honor society spot for answering her mum's frantic call in her native language from a Haitian boy whose parents stopped coming to his soccer games because they were afraid of speaking French by accident. The picture got bigger and uglier. This wasn't about me. It was about all of us. The day of the hearing, the conference room was filled with administrators. They played the video. They stated the facts of my violation. Then it was my turn. My hands were shaking under the table, but my voice was steady. I presented my evidence. The official letter from the ER doctor stating that my translation had prevented a fatal medication error. The stack of anonymous statements from other families, each one a small story of fear and lost opportunities. The district's own equity policy, highlighted and bookmarked. My mum tried to speak, her English broken, but her voice strong, about how she was proud of me for saving her mother, even if it meant getting in trouble with a foolish rule. The district representative, a woman I hadn't seen before, listened intently to every word. Principal Harris kept arguing that making an exception for me would undermine the entire system. But the woman from the district reminded him that civil rights complaints, which I had now officially filed, went through different channels than regular discipline. The final ruling was a compromise that nobody was happy about. 1 day of in-school suspension. The policy itself would be put under formal review by the district. It wasn't a clean victory, but it wasn't a total loss. I had stood up to the system, armed with their own rules and my own truth, and I hadn't completely broken. The day of my suspension, I sat in a small, windowless room, doing mindless worksheets, missing a critical chemistry lab that dropped my grade from an A to a B. The social cost was clear too. Some students nodded at me in support in the hallways, others whispered that I had caused too much trouble. But something had changed. A week later, a district-wide memo went out announcing an official emergency exception for language use during medical or safety situations. It was a small crack in the wall of silence. Then my op-ed in the school paper about what it felt like to be half-voiced was published. After it came out, other kids started coming up to me quietly, saying it captured exactly what they felt. The Vietnamese kid from my math class showed me where he'd highlighted parts that matched his experience. The fight wasn't over, but I was still standing. And sometimes, just standing is enough to keep a small, quiet resistance going. A powerful story of quiet courage against a system designed to silence. An act of love, punished as an act of defiance. But what did the court of public opinion have to say? First, the voice of pure outrage at the administration's inhumanity. One user writes, "The principal is the only villain here. To stand there and record a child during a clear medical emergency instead of asking, 'How can I help?' is monstrous. That man has no business being around children. The policy isn't about success. It's a racist cudgel he uses to wield power and control." This comment captures the visceral anger the audience feels. It's a direct, emotional condemnation that identifies the core injustice of the story and validates the narrator's struggle against a heartless bureaucracy. The second verdict focuses on the narrator's strategic brilliance and quiet strength. Another user commented, "This is a masterclass in fighting a bureaucracy." She didn't just get emotional, she got organized. She documented everything. She gathered evidence. She used their own rulebook against them. Getting the doctor's letter and the other students' statements wasn't just smart, it was brilliant. She's a future lawyer and a hero. This highlights the intellectual satisfaction of the story. It celebrates the narrator's intelligence and resourcefulness, providing a more analytical and empowering perspective that resonates with viewers who value cleverness and strategy. And finally, a comment on the quiet heroism of the allies who stood with her. Let's not forget the teacher who forgot to lock her drawer, or Orlando, who helped her organize the timeline. In systems of oppression, it's often the small, quiet acts of rebellion from allies that make the big ones possible. They didn't make loud speeches, but they provided the weapons she needed to fight. They are heroes too. This provides a hopeful, community-focused angle. It reminds the audience that even small acts of support can have a massive impact, and it widens the circle of heroism beyond just the narrator, leaving the audience with a sense of hope and solidarity. A single rule, a life on the line, and a choice that would define a young woman's life. This story reminds us that justice is not always loud, and that true courage can be found in a whispered conversation, in a stolen pamphlet, in the simple, powerful refusal to be silent when it matters most.